Well, today we're going to be diving into the automatic gearboxes that can completely destroy your wallet. It really doesn't matter how good a car is or how good its engine is, if it's fitted with a terrible, unreliable gearbox, it's still going to be a complete nightmare. So here are the top 5 automatics that I would completely avoid. Whilst it probably goes without saying, I don't recommend that you buy any cars from this list. I'm going to cover them in ascending order, gradually building up to the worst of the worst, the final boss of bad automatic gearboxes. That's actually quite a hard thing to do because they're all pretty bad in their own way. It's a bit like picking your favourite illness, for instance. Anyway, the first gearbox I'm going to speak about here, it shows why this is quite a useful approach, because it's not just found in one singular car, as is often the case, it's used in lots of different models. That gearbox is the Vauxhall Easytronic, which is anything but easy. So found in a whole host of the Vauxhall range up until the mid-2010s. You're going to get this in Corsas, you're going to get it in Astras, right up to the likes of the Zafira. So this is an automated manual gearbox, which means internally it's exactly the same as the manual option. The only difference is the gear change is being performed by a series of electronics and actuators opposed to your arm and your leg. Unfortunately, your arm and your leg are far more reliable because it's these actuators that can often fail, leaving the car stuck in gear, which makes the recovery of them quite interesting at times. And as for the repair itself, well, these actuators, they're electronically coded to the car, which means a cost-effective second-hand unit just isn't going to work. And if you take the car back to a main dealer, you'll pay an absolute fortune for a new one to be coded in. Your best bet if you find yourself in the position with one of these cars and a problematic gearbox is to find a company who can rebuild yours with a couple of days turnaround. In fact, your best bet is just to avoid these cars altogether if you haven't bought one already. Second in this list is the early Ford PowerShift gearboxes, often not referred to as PowerShift in the industry anymore. People tend to drop one of the letters out of there. I'll leave it open to your imagination what letter they drop, given it's not a very favoured gearbox in the trade. So these gearboxes are found in almost all Fords, from the little Fiesta right up to larger cars like the Kuga. What a lot of people don't realise though is there was actually 2 different variants of it. The smaller Fords like the Fiesta and the Focus, they used a dry clutch version of the gearbox, which had some pretty severe issues with heat management, whilst the larger Fords like the Kuga, they actually used a wet clutch variant, which on paper at least, it should have been much better, but it had problems of its own. For whatever reason, they used plastic retainers under tension inside that gearbox. Yeah, inside the gearbox. Doesn't take a genius to work out. Many heat cycles later, these start to fatigue. They would break off. They'd end up going through the gearbox like shrapnel, which would, of course, eventually lead to failure. Now, Ford obviously realised the error of their ways here because they stopped using both of these old PowerShift gearboxes back in 2016 and changed over to a more reliable set of gearboxes. What's quite strange about this whole situation though is despite the reputation that PowerShift name had amassed, the replacements, they continued to use that same PowerShift name. Ford never did change it, which makes things a little bit confusing. And those replacements, whilst not infallible, they did address the main failure points of the ones that came before, and therefore were a good bit more reliable. Third on this list is Fiat's Dualogic gearbox, which rather ironically is another automated, illogical manual. Found in the 500, the Panda, the Bravo, the Punto and also the Cubo, a combination of pump failures, actuator failures, electronic glitches, well, they secure its place in this list. Again, Fiat obviously realised they had some issues here, not least because I'm sure they had warranty claims coming in left, right and centre, but because they started to fit the facelifted 500s and Pandas with a revised pump and tweaks to the software, which did help a little bit, but they're still quite problematic, still a long way off getting a recommendation here. Amazingly, you do still get those who fiercely defend this gearbox. I can only imagine that's the type of person that enjoys a game of Russian roulette from time to time, because that's exactly what the gearboxes are like, hit or miss. Number 4, which is possibly the most widely used gearbox in this list, the DQ200 from the Volkswagen Audi group, or to the rest of us, the gearbox that you're likely to find in smaller automatic Volkswagens, Audis, Skodas and Seats, given that they all belong to the same group. So introduced back in 2008, this was the group's answer to the automatic gearbox for their lower torque output cars. Typically, they're smaller cars, up to 250 Newton meters. So you'll find that it's really common in Golfs, Polos, Fiat Ibizas, Audi A1s, Audi A3s and so on. Now, the problems with them, quite wide-ranging. The mechatronics unit, for instance, could fail. This would often cost thousands of pounds to repair, and more so, that was on the early versions of this gearbox. On top of that, you also had clutch packs, which would wear out well before time. One of the big contributors to this is because they used dry clutch packs, just like they did in the smaller Fords that used the PowerShift gearbox. Now, these were assumed to be okay for the lower torque output of these small cars, but in my opinion, they just weren't adequate because the failure rate was still huge, whilst the larger, more powerful cars on the range used wet clutch packs. And they weren't entirely problem-free, but they didn't experience half the issues of these dry clutch gearboxes. Over the years, this gearbox has become gradually more reliable, but we still see problems on cars as late as 2018, 2019, albeit just not as frequently as the older ones. The big kicker with this gearbox as well is with its complexity. If you do buy one and get problems, chances are you're going to need to take that to a specialist to repair it who has the specialised tools to do so. Your local corner mechanic probably just isn't going to be able to help when it comes to something like this, which of course drives up labour costs. In taking the top spot in this list, wasn't an easy decision to make, they're all so bad, but Nissan CVT gearbox built before 2018 has to take the top spot. This Jatco built gearbox has tarnished not only the reputation of Nissan CVTs, but CVTs as a whole. You find buyers have become increasingly more wary about buying a car equipped with a CVT, and I think examples like this are to blame. The truth is, not all CVTs are made equally. Toyota, for instance, they produce a fantastic CVT gearbox that can last for hundreds of thousands of miles. Nissan can produce one that might last a couple hundred miles if you're lucky. The problem is, Nissan's design, it just did not have much tolerance for abuse. That wasn't helped by a pretty inadequate cooling system that led to higher operating temperatures, just exacerbating everything, causing everything to wear out even more quickly. The final nail in the coffin was Nissan marketed these as being sealed for life, supposedly never needing an oil change in a bid to make them appear as very low cost to own and service. My opinion is oil is oil. It degrades whether or not you drive the car. Over time, oil loses its protective qualities and needs to be swapped out. The reality was then, the failure rate for these CVTs was absolutely huge. Even Nissan publicly took the issues up with Jatco. Over in the USA, class action lawsuits were flying. All of this for an unassuming gearbox fitted to hundreds of cars currently on the used market that you could easily mistake for being reliable from a Japanese brand. Now, please don't go buying any of these cars. Even a sadist isn't going to enjoy these types of experiences. There are plenty of great used automatics out there, and if you'd like me to cover 5 of those, then please do let me know in the comments section below. If in the meantime you go off and you buy another used car, please do remember one of our channel sponsors is Vehicle Score, and they very kindly provide 20% off any of their HPI checks to all of our viewers. Use the link in the description below. If you don't want to part with any money, at least make use of their free check to make sure that there's no skeletons in that car that you're thinking about buying's closet. As ever, thank you so much for watching. Please do hit the like button if you've enjoyed this, and if you haven't already, please do hit the subscribe button. I'll see you next time.